Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I welcome you all to this edition of our program. My name, I'm Professor Olufemi Saibu, and I'll be moderating today's webinar brought to you by the African Resolvers Network. But before we begin, I think we need to have a quick note on housekeeping, and please, we need to keep our microphones muted unless we are called upon to use the chat. So we be expecting that the speakers will speak for a few minutes, and after that, we will open the floor for live questions, and later we give the speakers opportunity to speak. Today's theme is minimum wage in macroeconomics Nigeria, a case study of Nigeria. And over the next 2 hours, like we said, we will examine evidence based on approaches to wage setting, how labor market pricing dynamics interact with inflation, and what affordabilities and fiscal capacity mean for Nigeria minimum wage policy going forward. So we are privileged to have with us 3 distinguished scholars of economics, each bringing a different perspectives to this conversation. One, we are looking at labor and human capital and national and urban economies. Also, we look at public finance and macroeconomic performance. I will introduce each of them shortly before they speak. So with us here, like I said, we have Professor Bolaji Okuwa, going to be our lead speaker today. Professor Okuwa is the Professor of Labor and National Economics at the Nigeria Institute of Social and Economic Research. She specializes in development economics and human capital development. And we open our technical discussion by examining wage settings from a labor market and human capital perspectives. Please join me in welcoming Professor Bolaji Okuwa to this platform. Prof, are you around?
Yes, please, I'm around. Thank you very much, Prof.
Welcome, Professor Okuwa.
So
Thank you very much.
The next is Professor Bruno Ibekilo. Sorry if I did not pronounce the Ibekilo very well.
Ibekilo.
Ibekilo, thank you.
Ibekilo.
Yes,
Ibekilo.
don't mind me, I'm a pure Yoruba man from Osun State. So the local tradition always reflect. So
thank you so much.
So you are welcome. And as a professor of economics from Chukwuemeka Odumegwu Ojukwu University, Anambra, your work span urban economics, public sector economics, development economics, and you will be speaking to us through how minimum wage policies play out across Nigerian state and urban rural divide. Professor Ibekilo, you are welcome also. So also,
thank you so much.
We are also having another distinguished professor, and it's Professor Humu Ahmed. He's going to be our final speaker, and he is from Bayero University, Kano, and the first female professor of economics from northern Nigeria. That's great. She specializes in public finance, macroeconomic performance, and development economics. And she will be closing our discussion by examining fiscal capacity, inflation, and affordability. Professor Ahmed, please, you are welcome also to our discussion.
Thank you very much.
So, like I said, we'll be glad to start the discussions, and we like the Professor Williams to please possibly have some opening remarks for us before we allow the speakers to speak.
Please go ahead.
Okay, so thank you very much. So now I call on the lead paper presenter, Professor Bolaji Okuwa, to please take the floor.
Thank you very much, Prof. Let me share my slide. Okay.
But please go ahead. Oh,
So I'm trying to share. Okay.
can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I'm trying to share my slide. Can you hear me at all?
Okay, please go ahead, please.
Okay. Thank you very much, the moderator, Prof. Good afternoon, everyone. The topic before us this afternoon that I'll be speaking on in the next few minutes is evidence-based wage setting in Nigeria, balancing inflation, productivity, and fiscal capacity. And my presentation outline is as follows. By way of introduction, can you all see my slides?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Sorry. So by way of introduction, sorry, something was coming up on the slide here. The minimum wage, as we all know, is a social contract between the government, the employer of labor, and also the workers in the economy. And for us in Nigeria, we have been using legislative acts for the past few years since the inception of civilian rule to set the minimum wage over the years. And from 1973 to 2019, we've actually had about 10 decrees and legislative acts that establish minimum wage. And that leads us to the slides on the evolution of Nigerian minimum wage in the country, which cuts across from 1981 to 2024 that we have for 70,000 naira. It's 125, we all know, 125 in 1981 moves to 250 naira. And by 2000, it was 5,500 for states and 7,500 for the federal government. And by 2021, it was 18,000. And by 2019, it moves to 30,000. And because of the issue of high cost of living and also shocks in the economy in terms of the reduction in in terms of the unification of exchange rates markets, and also the issue of fuel subsidy removal and the need for the review to be done in 2024 March, there was need for a review up in 2024, and that's may move us to 70,000. And so the current minimum wage at a glance talks about 70,000 naira, which was set at the peak of inflation when inflation was started, headline inflation 33.2 and reached GDP 3.4%. The key emphasis that we are making here today is to look at other macroeconomic indicators apart from just the cost of living alone in dictating or setting up wage increase, and that's inflation, productivity, and fiscal capacity. So why minimum wage? Why does it matter to everyone? It matters to workers because it's the minimum income required to have a decent standard of living amidst rising costs. It's also necessary for employer because it's the component of production cost, shaping investments and competitiveness and employment, especially among the SMEs. It's the major decision for the government because it's a fiscal obligation that serves as components of welfare boosting and poverty reduction macroeconomic policy framework. And for society, it's a combination of the two that will bring a multiplier effects and the growth in the economy, especially inclusive growth. So why this debate this morning? Why are we talking about this debate? This debate is necessary because minimum wage, like I said, it's not just about the salaries or compensation of workers. It's debates that's majorly around key macroeconomic variables such as inflation, productivity, fiscal capacity, poverty, governance, and social dialogue and social inclusion. And also, it's for us, as at now, what are we talking about? What are the central questions that we need to ask ourselves or we want to look at, despite the fact that we have minimum wage reviewed 2 years ago? Adequacy of this minimum wage is in question because of the high inflation that has eroded the purchasing power of each worker in the economy. So the central question that we want to ask ourselves is actually, should wage review be driven by public pressure or industrial action or ad hoc negotiation due to high cost of living, or by evidence-based wage setting? When is a wage adjustment justified, and by how much should wages be adjusted? Can policymakers move from ad hoc negotiations to evidence-based wage setting? Those are some of the questions that we need to ask ourselves and discuss. So what then is the evidence-based wage structure that we are talking about in terms of wage setting? It's a compensation system where wages and salaries decisions are based on empirical, reliable data and measurable indicators. It's very necessary because it's integrative negotiations using social, economic, labor, and physical productivity data to negotiate fair and equitable wages. Primary determinants are majorly government revenue, labor productivity, workforce requirements, and standard of living. The empirical foundation for this wage setting empirical evidence is on the measurable indicators, the outputs, cost of living, productivity, and revenue. And it should be a negotiation that is backed by data reviewed based on process that can withstand scrutiny. So what are the 5 pillars of evidence-based wage structure that any economic we want to look at when they are considering evidence-based wage setting framework? The first thing that the economy will look at is in terms of setting the minimum wage using evidence-based wage setting is labor market analysis. This talks about supply and demand dynamics, skill scarcity, industry wage trends, regional and international benchmarks. Cost of living metrics is another one that we need to, it's another framework. Talks about inflation, food prices, housing, and so on, ensuring decent wage. Productivity measurement is also key. Organizational, sectorial, and individual performance versus total economic output. Not GDP, but labor productivity is very important here. Fiscal sustainability is also key. Revenue generation, debt obligations, budget constraints, and long-term expenditure projections. Then job evaluation, determining responsibility, skill requirements, and educational qualification for role valuation. So what is the case for evidence-based wage setting in an economy? For an effective wage setting framework, it rests on 3 mutually reinforcing pillars. Key, we have other reinforcing pillars like poverty, unemployment, social security, and political imperatives. But for this presentation, focusing on 3, which is inflation, productivity, and capacity, fiscal capacity. Inflation, because it preserves purchasing power of people when we consider it and as part of the wage setting framework. Fiscal capacity, because the government will have to take a decision of the ability to pay the increase in wage, especially in a situation where we have government as the employer of formal labor wage commitments, and also the ability to pay and sustainability. Productivity, which is a sustainable wage growth that must be balanced with improvements in output through investments in infrastructure. So these three must be fused together, not work in silos. So this chart is just showing the wage setting strategies globally, the approach globally. The first one is one that we are using in Nigeria, which is the legislative, the acts, legislation acts. The government sets the minimum wage through legislation or executive order. Then the second one is social dialogue. The third one, automatic indexation. Then the fourth one is productivity linked approach. For all these four, anyone that you're going to approach or putting the two together, there must be key principles that must be followed. And this is it must have evidence-based, inclusiveness, fair and balance, and sustainability. So some of this approach has been used by other governments across the globe. We have France and Latin America. They are practicing the tripartite formula-based and indexation. This is a real-time CPI and productivity linked formula that sets through governments and employer dialogue. We also have collective bargaining, sector-driven negotiation between unions and employers without rigorous statutory flow. We have Germany, Denmark, and Sweden. They are adopting this. We have also cost of living adjustments, which is COLA. Belgium and United States, parts of United States are using this. Performance-based wage setting, wage recommendation tied to GDP per worker and productivity gains. Singapore uses this a lot. And this is very important because especially where you have growth that is not linked to inclusiveness in an economy. Statutory salary structure is also another one that is being practiced by France and Malaysia. So that now leads me to the discussion on the three key pillars that I want to emphasize in terms of evidence-based wage setting for Nigeria, rather than ad hoc negotiation that we use for during the act of legislating minimum wage. So this chart is just showing the trends of Nigerian inflation rates over the years from 2019 to 2026, June 2026. It's increasing, except for 2025, till the minimum wage rate was increasing. And so even though the inflation rate reduced a little bit because of the CPI basing of the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, it still have major effects on the minimum wage that it was set in 2024, because the purchasing power of worker in 2019 cannot be compared with that of 2024. What the money can buy is very, very different. So that leads us to the impact on the household of the inflation. So it has nominally it was increased drastically, 133% nominal increase, but the real value dropped drastically. The food and transports constitute major, costs for the household, during this period, even from 2024 to now. Food prices and transportation takes major income of dominating low income earners group. Then there's also the review of the 3-year review from 5 years to 3 years. Then inflation is still eroding the purchasing power of individuals. So persistent inflation is already reducing the real value of the 70,000 in 2024. So this is just a way of just showing the effects of the minimum wage over the years, the 30,000 and also the 30,000, which I've also explained. the minimum wage, 30,000, which was established based on headline inflation, so from 11.4 in 2019 to over 33 in 2024. Then exchange rate depreciation, COVID-19 effects, and rising food prices are the macroeconomic pressure that affects the real purchasing power of citizens, that calls for a review of the minimum wage. But for 2024 minimum wage adjustment, the headline inflation declined from 33% in 2024 to 25 points and 15.91 in June 2025. The effect of this is just showing that the wage, though was 133% nominally, it was largely an attempt to address some post-reform cost of living crisis and restore purchasing power of workers. So purchasing power still eroding, standard of living very low, inflation alone cannot solve the wage policy, productive and fiscal capacity of the economy must also be considered. And that leads us to the issue of productivity. The fundamental principles for looking at that must be considered in looking at productivity as part of pillars for establishing evidence-based wage setting is that sustained high wages should be backed with improvements in productivity. Two sides to this role of productivity in wage setting. The first one is that private sector-led economy increase in productivity to them spur increased wage consideration. But for economy where workers' wage is seen as a stimulus to improvements in productivity, efficiency, like the efficiency wage theory, this also needs to be considered in terms of its role in setting wages. Productivity, Nigerians' GDP, however, has expanded significantly in absolute terms. But the economy is generally returned to positive growth after major shock. But the growth does not measure labor productivity directly, but gives insight into the productive capacity of the economy. Why? But we look at the structural challenges of the large informal sector labor force that hinders the pace of economic-wide productivity. The Nigerian economy is largely informal sector driven. About 80% of the economy is informal sector, and most of the people that have that we are talking about in terms of minimum wage, they are not as much as those in informal sector. So informal sector structure brings about structural issues into the minimum wage setting, which must be considered. So economic growth and inclusivity. Here I'm just trying to explain the fact that even though there is a slight growth in the economy, real GDP from 3.4% in 2024 to 3.9 in 2025, the size of the economy also grew a little, but in real terms, the growth is not inclusive because of the issue of multidimensional rate of the economy that says that almost 65% of every person living in Nigeria is multidimensional poor, and also the issue of inclusiveness in terms of marginalized and the vulnerables. So the link between productivity, economic growth, and inclusivity is shown here. Just briefly show you that presently, when you look at the wage 2024 till now, sustainable wage growth requires improvements in productivity, as higher output allows business to absorb labor costs without raising price or cutting jobs. The growth performance, while Nigerian GDP grew by approximately 3.4, as I explained in 2024, growth is often concentrated in resilient sectors like ICT and finance. Majorly telecommunications contributed majorly to the GDP growth. So minimum wage earners, most of, like I explained before, most work in public sector administrations, health, education, where productivity gain is slower compared to the resilient ones in ICT and service. So large informal sector of the economy is also slow, with low level of industrialization affects the inclusiveness of the growth that we are seeing, and that also affects the purchasing power of people. So this slide shows also the economic growth and capacity to support high wages. We need to consider the productivity of the economy. We need to consider the unemployment issue. We need to consider the poverty level, the industry that is growing, the service sector, though primarily driven by GDP. Like I said, industry like manufacturing, agri, they grew modestly during this period that we are talking about, but informal sector largely and uneven productivity appear in these sectors, which is very, very critical when we consider the issue of evidence-based wage setting. How are we going to capture the informal sector? How are we going to fuse them into the wage setting of the economy in terms of the purchasing power, in terms of the inclusiveness of the activities in the growth of the economy? So that takes me to the issue of fiscal capacity and the availability of high wage. So I've talked about the issue of inflation. I've talked about the issue of productivity. Now I want to look at the fiscal capacity, the ability of government to pay for high wages, to increase in wages as we set it. So recent reforms, including petrol subsidy removal and exchange rate adjustment, has expanded government revenue and created more fiscal space compared to previous years. So affordability constraint looks at despite high revenue, capacity is limited by heavy debt servicing obligations and device the fiscal strength of 36 states. So even before the introduction, before the 2024 minimum wage legislation of 70,000, almost 26 states were not able to pay the 30,000. For now, there are some states also that have not been able to pay for 70,000. So fiscal capacity is very critical. A critical decision must be made by government about ability to pay increase in wage bills, fiscal capacity, without jeopardizing key infrastructure, education, health, etc., or incur more debts. So how to finance upward review of wage bills is very critical. And this will come to fiscal discipline, sustained productivity. So this just shows the circles of future wage bill policy, shortening review cycles, predictability, and structural needs, as I've explained before. So what are we talking about in terms of the evidence? The inflation, productivity, GDP growth, fiscal capacity, and overall assessment of the short presentation about these three key pillars of evidence-based wage setting, if government is going to consider it alongside with the legislative acts that is being done before. The first one, inflation, wage setting, inflation. So this has consistently eroded the purchasing power of the minimum wage between reviews. So the assessment is that there's a strong case for review. If you're going to look at inflation, you push for a strong case for review of the minimum wage. So implication is that wage reviews should occur before a prolonged erosion of real wage. Then productivity, GDP growth. The economy has continued to grow, driven mainly by service sector through productivity gains, though productivity gains remain uneven across sectors. I've explained also before. So this shows a moderate support for wage setting, and wage increase should be done by policies that raise productivity and competitiveness in the economy. Productivity is very key in wage setting. In an economy where wage increase is a stimulus to productivity and inflation is very high, there should be a justification or the increase in productivity. And over the years, we see that even labor productivity, the output per worker is decreasing, diminishing over the years. And it's a signal to the fact that though the economic at large is growing, but the individual, in terms of the individual productivity, is not actually growing to impact the economy. So fiscal capacity is also very important. Government revenue have improved, but debt obligations and state level disparity remain significant constraints. And the assessment here is that it's also qualified for support. Wage adjustment should be done, supported by stronger assessment and mobilization and prudent management. Overall assessments, the current wage setting process remains largely reactive instead of evidence. We react immediately when we see that purchasing power is being eroded. Union comes up, industrial actions will take place. People begin to say that the money cannot take them home and so on. But reform is required, and that will be from the policy recommendation. So what will an evidence-based framework deliver? One, it delivers a predictable wage reviews. It also protects purchasing power of workers. It brings about fiscal discipline and also strong public and private collaboration. So what then is implementation roadmap that this evidence-based wage structure is trying to put in place? The first one is the first one is the framework design. We legislate the evidence-based review framework and design the minimum wage adjustment index. This index will not only include inflation, which is cost of living, or productivity alone. There are so many other variables, macroeconomic variables, that will be included in generating the minimum wage adjustment index. Then we also have the data and infrastructure. We build the data sharing infrastructure across the National Data Bank, which is domiciled with National Bureau of Statistics, federal level and state agencies, and also other organization agencies that are under the minimum wage acts of the government. Then we'll do a pilot wage review, test the framework in the next maybe schedule review, benchmarking recommendations against the index. Then you bring up the institution that will facilitate the work. So in conclusion, evidence-based wage setting, emphasizing inflation, balancing inflation, productivity, and fiscal capacity of the government, presently is showing that Nigeria's challenge is not the level of national minimum wage, but the absence of a transparent, predictable, evidence-based framework for determining when and by how much wages should be reviewed. So therefore, we establish that inflation is eroding the purchasing power of citizens. The minimum wage that we have now is no longer what its value, its real value is not compared to what the minimum wage in 2019 can give to citizens or can give to people. So economic growth continues slightly, but productivity gains remain unevenly distributed. And the issue of labor productivity is also key here in terms of the declining labor productivity. Fiscal capacity, though, has improved a little bit, but debt obligation, state disparity, and also large informal sector persists, and this will erode the growth that we are experiencing, and eventually it will have negative effects on the citizen and the workers. Productivity must match up with increased salary demand. Major consideration in wage setting, labor productivity, and also fiscal discipline. So what are the recommendations? So before the recommendation, I would like to present this complementary strategic levelers to facilitate productivity gains in the economy. So the first thing that we need to do to help in terms of productivity gains is to do skill enhancements, enhance investment. We prioritize investment in technology, which is going on in different dimensions, but some are in silo, they're not fusing together, but the government needs to do more, and also private sector. There should be a synergy, a collaboration. Infrastructure investment is also key. Critical infrastructure like electricity, roads is necessary. More should be done because enabling environment is one that will spur productivity in the economy and encourage investors to come and invest. Investment in research and development, this is very, very important. Any economy that is not putting priority in R&D cannot develop. Spur spending in R&D as a prerequisite for innovative process for institutional and farm level efficiency performance. And institutional mechanism, there should be a clear institutional rules and networking framework for employer and employee rules in circumstance facilitating issues. So what are the policies recommendation? So the first policy recommendation that's put in place here is institutionalize an evidence-based framework. So this will guide future reviews by inflation, productivity, fiscal capacity, and so on. Then we maintain regular, predictable reviews, preserve the 3 years at 3 cycles as a minimum intervals with flexibility, earlier review during exceptional inflation shocks, strengthen productivity as a foundation, invest in infrastructure, electricity, digital connectivity, education, health to expand the economic capacity to sustain high wages. So deepen fiscal reforms and subnational capacity. This is very key. And it's being done now, but the state level, the state capacity should be widened. They should be accountable and also be accountable in terms of their productivity, their IGR generation, and also I want to recommend that there should be a regulation of minimum wage act that will allow the states to enact or bring up their own minimum wage based on the IGR and allocation given to them, and also private sector based on their profitability and other macro variables that they will use to generate their wage bills, improve productivity of the states. Then lastly, complement wages with human capital and macro stability. So pair wage policy with skill development, digital literacy and discipline, and macroeconomic management for lasting welfare gains. On this note, I conclude my presentation. Thank you very much. Question and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that comprehensive presentation. Indeed, you demonstrated your scholarship while you were presenting. I was trying to search for you on Google Scholars to see your current qualification standing, and I'm impressed with the quality of the paper you present and also the conclusions that you provided, which, like you said, they are driven from empirical analysis. So I just do 1 or 2 lines to just provide a few highlights of your presentation, though I give you a little more time. And was allocated, but because what you are presenting serve as basis for every other presentation that is complete. So basically, you provided historical backgrounds to the national minimum wage, and you went straight how this built into the current minimum wage, especially how inflation and also the current economic situation supported the need for a new minimum wage, and how this minimum wage is critical to different segments of societies, the workers, because that's what their life depend on, the employers that maybe bid on their costs, the government is a responsibility for them to defend and to protect the workers' welfare, and society who benefit from this wage rate. And also, you then come up with your own recommendation, which is called the evidence-based wage structure, which is built on 5 pillars: the labor market analysis, the cost of living metrics, and productivity measurement, and fiscal sustainability and job evaluation. So these 5 were based on your initial stakeholders you have established: the workers, the government, the employers, and the societies. On the basis of those categories of people, then you identify 5 critical pillars upon which any wage that will be relevant to the Nigerian economy will be based. And you justify the why we have to follow this approach, apart from citing cases of other countries where they have done it. Then you provided how this also can be supported with the local experience, the current wage, the capacity of government, and productivity issues. And beyond that, you are able also to situate your proposal within the current minimum wage adjustment, and also you identify how fiscal capacity should be considered whenever the wage is being designed, especially that it is difficult for us to have a unified, fixed, rigid minimum wage without considering the capacity of the payers. And also, while we consider the capacity, we also mention that as well the welfare of people who are working should also be important, especially those people who are actually contributing to the economy. And then you provided some indicators that need to be considered, and you classify them into different categories. The one that it should be have a moderate support, the one that also you say, okay, is very, very important, should be qualified depending on the levels, and also what kind of reforms that is required to achieve each level of an wage to be set. So you went further to introduce a kind of a guide how it can be implemented. You not just provide a solution, you provide the SOP, the standard operating procedures that can be adopted to implement it for any government that want to do that. And you classify that into 4 phases: the framework design, data and infrastructure development, a pilot with review, and also implementation that can be adopted in some areas and begin out to review before the final implementation. And then you concluded by providing the complementary strategies that need to be put in place, that just certain wages without the corresponding infrastructure, institutional framework, maybe have been the reason why the existing wage structures failed. And you provided 4 of those levers: the skill enhancement investment, the infrastructural investment, the research and development investment, and also institutional mechanism to ensure compliances and adoption. And then you provided your solid 5 recommendations that are driven from your presentations. And I believe this is really quite impressive. And very later, so there are some questions also that I also want to engage you with, and I want to allow other speakers to also contribute their own before we begin to ask questions. But on behalf of everybody, I want to thank you for these excellent presentations. And like you requested, questions and discussions will come after others are presented. So with this, I want to yield the floor. Yeah, I want to yield the floor to the second speaker, who is also speaking on a similar topic, but with a little diversion perspective from what you presented. So I want to yield the floor to Professor Bruno Ibekilo, who's a specialist in urban economics, public sector economics, development economics, who will bring his perspectives on subnational and state government and urban rural implementation to this. So, sir, you have the floor now to make your presentation, sir. Prof.
Okay. Am I on now?
You are on, sir.
Good afternoon so much. Thank you so much for having me around. So what I want to do exactly is to, like indicated in the topic I sent there, is to look at labor market pricing dynamics, which is just looking at how wages has changed over time and how they have behaved as it concerns how they have exerted pressure around inflation in Nigeria. Like has earlier been presented by the first presenter, we all see how inflation, or rather how wage could trigger inflation, and circumstances how wage and how inflation can as well affect the wages in terms of the purchasing power of the unit of labor that is earning the wage. But mine here is to look at again and throw up this question: if actually these wage increases lead to inflation. By way of introduction, we looked at what labor market is, and then we looked at the variance in earnings. What gives rise to this variance in earnings, which we say can be geographical and can be demand for that labor, and it can again be market discrimination. Somebody was saying that packaging is everything. Somebody may be earning 100,000 naira in Ikoyi as a desk officer, and the same person may be earning 80,000 naira somewhere outside Ikoyi, or even in that same ratio. So the market can be fragmented, or there could be discrimination in the market. Then industry and firm size. Then that the bigger firms can pay more than the smaller firms. Likewise, the industry. But again, institutional policies like minimum wage laws, okay, and that accounts for why the labor market is always very, very. You can hardly deregulate the labor market so much. Government always come in there to ensure that the worker is not exploited by underpaying. Because if you look at if you allow the laissez-faire concept to play itself out in the labor market, we all see that the employer of labor, who in this case could be seen as the capitalist, will always want to exploit labor, because by paying labor, that income that is far below his marginal physical product, from which the capitalist can then draw his abnormal profit in this case. So government always come in there to ensure that policies try to keep a wage at a given minimum, so that workers are not cannot be exploited. And like the last speaker presented, that we can as well make legislations to enable states set higher wages, and even firms that can afford to do that, which I think is already going on, and that's a good side for the unemployed. Then further, we want to say that the demand for labor, demand for labor is just can be seen as a derived demand. We don't demand labor because of labor, because we demand labor in a production because of what we can get from labor working for us as a factor input. And we have seen the relationship. There's always a strong relationship between the growth of an economy and that of and the rate at which we demand labor, which is for like we said earlier, is for production. Now we look at wage and minimum wage in Nigeria. That has been done by the last speaker, Professor Okuwa, where we looked at the changes that has occurred over time in the competition to labor. Okay, but again, we said that we see that this dynamics or changes in wage has taken an upward trend in Nigeria. But the question here will remain the ability of wage to meet the need of an average family. And that is where we'll now try to look at these changes over time, like we've heard here, from 125 naira in 1981. And when people hear 125 naira, it will just be sounding funny. But there was a time that was somebody's take home, which was able to take them home. And today we have a legislation that says 70,000 naira. And we know that sometimes what can 70,000 get today? And that is when you have started bringing that income close to the rate of inflation in Nigeria today. So these areas has been touched again. And we now see that the income, minimum wage in Nigeria, in my view, have not been able to take care of the needs of an average worker. Then we now ask again, those persons who are demanding this minimum wage, have they been productive enough to see that to have a moral justification or be on the right locus to demand for higher pay? So we see equally that the productivity is low in Nigeria, and when productivity is low, the output automatically can be seen to be low, okay, and that cannot be able to curb the supplies deficit that will be needed to that can induce inflation. Then again, we argue that the aggregate labor productivity in Nigeria suggests that labor is earning more than that is earning more than his fiscal product. Because if you look at the productivity level and look at what labor is earning, sometimes, especially in most of these public sector establishments, people earn more than what their productivity level states. So we look at we've seen that in between 2016 and 2023. We'll see that in the next slide around the table, the graph we have there, the figure we have there. Then again, we look at the reflection on the dropping value of productivity, even in terms of the dollar value of hour worked. We saw that from 2014 going down to $7.5 in 2014, going down to 6.8 in 2024, around when we have added when we did the last minimum wage law that increased it to 70,000 naira. We can equally look at the value of products percentage change in labor productivity from 2014 to 2023. We see that from 2014 we have started having a negative value for labor productivity of labor in Nigeria. So that becomes a problem. Labor productivity is low, inflation is high. Look at the trend of inflation from 2023 again. Just a picture of, let's have the picture of what we have around the minimum wage increase era. We see that we have an upward trend of inflation, though from 2025 we have seen that the inflation moved down from around 33 to around 25 and less. So we look at again wage increase and inflation in Nigeria. So from this 33% around when we are peaking in 2024, then from 18%, 18,000 minimum wage in 2011. Okay, so the impact of this inflation on this wage, we can see it from the conventional purchases. an average family is will be able to make, and we know, as this basket of goods an average family can afford with minimum wage tend to go down, welfare, general welfare, can be seen to go down. We give instance of what an average worker can afford in 2011 with a minimum wage of 18,000 naira. The worker was able to afford a bag of rice. But due to inflation, inflation, with inflation, we now have an increase in minimum wage to 30,000 naira pre-2024. That 30,000 naira was inadequate to buy the same bag of rice for the worker. So, and we say 30,000 not being adequate to buy a bag of rice. That is excluding other components of the basket of welfare for the family. Like Prof said here earlier, feeding and transportation is about the major thing that takes money away from the worker. So labor is deemed to be exploited because of the low purchasing power of his income. That same labor, again, we are arguing, is also underproductive because of the circumstances, the structure of production in Nigeria. So again, now that we have gotten 70,000 minimum wage, that's 70,000 naira can barely get a bag of rice, but the remnant of the leftover cannot even afford anything further. We're talking, remember, our analysis is always based on a family of mother, father, and let's say 2 children. So we now see that welfare has depleted greatly. So what we have said here is that the real value of the minimum wage, which we have proceeded with welfare, has been greatly eroded. An increase in minimum wage in such a scenario may unlikely lead to a substantial increase in inflation, because we talk about inflation as if we have gotten all we want, and then we are producing enough. But we are arguing that given this low purchasing power, that an increase in minimum wage will not likely to increase inflation substantially within the economy. Though some studies like Ajibola and Oraka and others found that minimum wage announcement shock contribute to inflationary pressure in Nigeria. That cannot be challenged, because we know that once government starts to talk about increasing minimum wage, that salaries prices tend to jump up. That we have seen over time, and at times it seems as if we are going to start announcing minimum wage increases as a secret. So then we look at the challenges. The challenges are clear here with us. Challenges are clear here with Scott. The last speaker have talked about fiscal constraints. High wage increases government wage bill, yes. So requiring shift away from subsidy regimes, while subnational governments and some private employers face budget limits, leading to uneven and delay in wage payments. So, and that is what is happening now. We have seen federal government and subnational governments grappling to meet up with the new salary increase for our members in our universities, members of our union in our universities, the academic staff of universities. Government has not been able to meet up with the catchback required to be able to meet up with the requirements of paying CATA, EAA, and professorial allowances for those in a higher professorial level. And same has applied in most other subnationals, like I've been stated here earlier. Most states have not been able to meet up with what is required to do the 70,000 minimum wage in the way it ought to be done. What we now see that once one person is earning the lowest level is earning 70,000 naira, the incremental adjustment becomes staggered, and the rate of increase becomes reduced that today in some states we have people who have worked for over 20 to 30 years still earning less than 100,000 naira or 105,000, even and a little above 100,000 naira, and we still pretend that we are paying minimum wage. Then the challenge again we have is high level of informality. The investment in human capital and technology adoption is weak in economies like Nigeria, where the informal sector is about 65%, contribute about 65% of GDP, and employing about 80% of Nigerian workforce. So most of the things we are talking about here which we can get from secondary data, from government agencies, will impact, will solve a little problem, because the Nigerian economy is highly informal. Most of the information we require. How many people are even earning this 70,000 naira we're talking about? A very few earns that, and those others are earning less, especially those that are privately engaged and self-employed in the rural agricultural sector. Then again, we've seen the challenge of slow productivity growth, constrained by low investment in human capital, technology, and skill acquisition. So these are the major challenges facing the system, and we must find a way to wriggle ourselves out of it. And what are we recommending? Top national governments at all levels should pursue more productive-based and anti-inflationary measures that will not. We understand this challenge of this twin effect of trying to fight inflation and fight employment, which Phillips did something around there in the Phillips Cup. So how do we do this? There are some what do you call it? Means of there are policy mix through which we can afford that. Find a way to boost productivity while not hurting inflation levels that are like pushing it up. Then we must incentivize production. How do we tackle energy? What are the most major costs? What are those things that are pushing up? Because major of the things we have in Nigeria is cost push. The majority of inflation we have in Nigeria has been seen to arise from a cost push, and major drivers of this cost is energy. Energy cost. What is that the government can do to incentivize investment in the energy sector so that we can cut energy? And again, another cost-reducing measures within the real sector. That again requires that government, being another the biggest employer in the formal sector, should equally look at their own cost again. That is about cost of governance. That could be another area, a major area where government can push the money that is recovered from reduced cost of governance and invest them in these areas that will develop a capacity and then bring about increased productivity and higher earnings without pushing up inflation. Or rather, even when inflation has increased, it can be accommodated. Because as we know, some level of inflation is equally good because it will incentivize investment and production in these areas. Because like we know, as prices increase, supply tend to follow suit. Then we have to reduce the size of the informal sector. Sometimes we look at our informal sector as if it's not a problem. That big size of the informal sector makes a mess of the most of analysis we are making. The informality there equally takes a lot of opportunities away from government. You cannot even capture them to even bring about incentives like what we can get from Bank of Industries and other opportunities that are around us. Even when donor agencies come around, trying to capture them to identify what they are doing becomes a problem. So we need to reduce the size of this informal sector. Thank God the fintechs are doing that now by trying to at least bring them in the financial services, and that has improved our financial inclusion levels in the country. Then we look at what we do in the system. We have to find out what is required through the ground and town. Okay, through the ground and town relationship, we must start teaching industry-centric human capital development to increase labor productivity, which will lead to wage growth. Okay, that has become very imperative. There must be this strong collaboration between town and gown. What is the university? What are those people who are coming out from the university? What are they job ready? Are they employment ready? Are they industry ready? Today we're having problem of unemployability. The level of unemployability and underemployment in the country today has taken it away from talking about employment. I don't think employment is becoming a big problem. What's becoming the problem now is under unemployability and under employment. So that has become very necessary to increase labor productivity that will lead to wage growth. That become imperative to meet emerging industrial needs and with supply side reforms to avoid inflationary spirals. And again, this will create a disincentive for brain drain, because once people are engaged, that what do you call it? Incentive to move out will reduce. Though this needs to be touched again. What needs to be touched again here could be the foreign exchange, because majority of people are now leaving this country just because they could go there and earn $1 and then convert it to naira and become millionaires overnight. Again, our exchange rate is not helping issues. Even safer here. Even our locals, the safer way, our neighboring francophone West African countries, even they are safer, has become a bigger currency to exchanging at a higher rate to naira. So I believe we have looked at this wage and inflation dilemma. Increasing minimum wage as we have it today will not cause a big problem on inflation, but because the purchasing power is already low, we need to do that. We find means of expanding productivity. And when we do that, we think we are of the view that the system will get better, especially for the fixed income earner. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Prof. This is excellent again, and we appreciate your perspectives. And the bulk of your discussion, from what I can pick, is that you are arguing that inflation, minimum wage cannot be determined in absolute terms, and that we need to consider the labor market dynamics, especially the pricing mechanism of not only the wage, but also other costs that are included in production outlay of organization. That labor is a derived product for which the demand for it depends on demand for the products produced by the firm. So because of that, we cannot talk about wage rate without talking about the price of the product from which the wage will be paid. So you argued that the earnings the earnings that flows to the organization from which labor are paid is a function of economic performance. And the economic performance also determines at least the employability of labor, because it's only when firms earn bigger money that they have fiscal capacity to pay higher wage rates. And there is a dilemma that you identified, that in Nigeria, where is general low productivity, there is a high cost of living. So while firms may be considering paying low wage rates to workers, they are also constrained when they consider the cost of living for the people. So they are between these two C's. They are looking at their whole revenue base, and also they must consider the welfare of the workers, because when workers earn below their cost of sustenance, there are tendency for them to be demotivated and to be low. So now there are challenges here. Is it the high cost of living that erode the minimum wage, that make workers to produce little, or the low wage rate that is below their sustain level that makes them to produce low? So and this issue is raising, there's a need for us to consider the two sides of the dynamics, the employer and the employee, and the general economic condition that operates. So you were able to show clearly that over years, especially from 2015, the labor productivity has been negative. And as a result of that, the producers and employers, they are reluctant in paying something that is not commensurate with marginal productivities of workers. But at the same eyesight, and therefore one is now worried what drives the inflation at least, and because the inflation should be driven by output, or the inflation also drive output itself because it's either way. So the question is, wage increase and inflation in Nigeria seems to be highly correlated, and because of that, it is difficult for companies to depend only on productivities in their wage determination. And you cited examples and studies that have established how inflation impacts on wage rate, and productivity has been constrained because of the condition of living. You identify some challenges, especially the fiscal constraint that the high wage increase, no doubt, increase government wage bill and also affect the private sectors. Because when government raise their minimum wage, what kind of private sectors tends to move to the public sectors, and that affects the private sectors that actually pay the tax from which the wage are paid. So secondly, we identify high level of informalities, in which case the many people who are working in Nigeria, they work in informal sectors who actually are not at least banded by the minimum wage. That many people who work in formal sectors, they earn less than 70,000, and these people are more than 80% of Nigerian workforce. So meaning that the minimum wage policy actually affect less than 20% of Nigerian workforce, and hence has little implication on the inflation, because the minimum wage rate is applicable to around 20% of workforce, and therefore they do not determine the cost of production of many of the companies in Nigeria, and also does not affect major workforce. And hence, we cannot attribute inflation in Nigeria to minimum wage. So, but could be attributed to the wage rate, but not the minimum wage. And you made some recommendations, and one, that the national and subnational government at all levels also should pursue more productive anti-inflationary measures that will not hurt employment, like incentivizing production through reduced energy costs and other cost reducing measures for the real sector. At the same time, that government should find a way of bringing on board the informal sector to the formal sector, such that people who work in the formal sectors can also benefit from minimum wage. It's only then that minimum wage policy will have meaning and can be effective. That it's not likely to be effective when a policy is only affecting around 20%, whereas 80% of others are not affected positively. But the consequence of that wage rate, because whenever the wage rate is raised, the minimum wage is raised, the market responds positively and inflation increased. Whereas only 20% were able to have something to meet up with the high price, the remaining 80% suffer from the benefit of 20%. So until every sector, formal and informal, are brought under the bracket of minimum wage, then the minimum wage will be ineffective in Nigeria. So that's the a little summary I can have from that. And I believe during the question and answer, you may be having opportunity to provide more information about that. So given this, I want to yield the floor also to our third speaker for today to also provide his input on the issues. So I want to call on Professor Humul Hamad, who is a professor of economics also, and she works in Bayero University, Kano, with specialization in public finance, macroeconomic performance, and development economics. So she's talking about fiscal capacity, inflation, and macroeconomic stability in this study. So, Ma, you have the floor, and you can then share your slide, Ma.
Thank you very much, moderator. Good evening, members.
Good evening, Ma.
Yes, Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be on board to this important conversation, and that is on a topic that affects several lives or millions of lives of Nigerian workers, and indeed the future of our entire economy. My presentation today focuses on minimum wage, inflation, affordability, and purchasing power in Nigeria, with a look at the sustainable path to workers' welfare and inclusive growth. I believe we want to have a very important and robust discussion on how to build a sustainable path to workers' welfare, as well as inclusive growth in the country. I also believe there is the need for us to understand what minimum wage entails, and then we look at it from the perspective of inflation and purchasing power, and why simply raising wages is not enough. We'll examine Nigeria's data, learn from global best practices, and chart a path forward that addresses the root causes of declining living standard. On the presentation outline, I will have 6 thematic areas. 1, I will address the problem or the issue, and then I will also look at the theoretical framework, i.e. the conceptual framework, clarifying what we mean by minimum wage, inflation, affordability, and purchasing power. Thirdly, I will also dive into Nigeria's data to look at the minimum wage history and trajectory. We will also look at inflation as well as its trend over time, then the currency movements in the country and how it also impacts on the minimum wage. And finally, we'll look at the household spending patterns and how it also affects the issue of minimum wage in the country. Fourthly, I will explain why wages alone fail to solve the problems. Otherwise, why do we continuously advocate for high wages? And why high wages anyway? Why are we not looking at the downward trend? It's always an upward review. So we'll try to look at the issues there surrounding it, despite the good intentions of the government as well as policymakers. And fifthly, we'll present a sustainable fix. That is the issue of productivity, affordability, and the global best practices, because there is a need for us to look outside the box, see how other countries were able to address this crucial issue and how they were able to nip the issues in the bud. So we will try to see some of these case studies and then borrow 1 or 2 things from them, so that when we are addressing in terms of recommendations and challenges, we'll be able to profile that. And finally, we will try also to look at the path forward. Going forward, what does Nigeria need to do? How is our policy roadmap going to be? With clear, for instance, timelines on them, and then there will also be stakeholder roles. Who is to do what? What is expected of the federal government, states and local government? What is expected of the monetary authorities? What is expected of the labor unions? What is expected of other social vanguards in the society? All this we will try to make some resolutions on them, and then finally we will build, for instance, a lasting, and then I will also encourage the members to also key in from their questions and other things on what needs to be done going forward. So in terms of the executive summary of this particular paper, which is the next slide, please. Before we dive into details, we will give co-arguments in brief. 4 key points will summarize this entire process this evening. First, this is not a wage problem alone. Like I said at the initial introductory stages, Nigerian workers face dwindling living standards despite repeated minimum wage increases. Why is that so? How can we fix it? How can we move forward with info and statistics that will help to guide us in the process? We said minimum wage has seen a lot of have been thrown out. Sorry. First time. Okay. Minimum wage has seen a lot of ups and downs over time because we say wages are only half of the problem. Second is that inflation is the silent tax. It operates quietly, slowly, but relentlessly. So price growth has repeatedly outpaced wage growth, eroding purchasing power in real income. We can give a worker a raise today, but if prices rise faster, you have effectively given such worker a pay cut. Thirdly, productivity, we say, is the durable fix. Sustainable wage growth must be backed by higher output per worker, not just legislation, as we have also known, because if labor unions can clamor for more wages, then it's going to be affected by government through legislation and so on and so forth. But when we say productivity fix is the answer, what we are saying is that it's not just wage increment, because wages can be eroded by a number of other macroeconomic factors, which we will explain. Inflation is one. You cannot therefore legislate prosperity. You have to produce it. Fourthly, policy must be holistic. When we want to look at the wage policy in this country, we have to look at it in terms of other macroeconomic indicators, such as stability in prices, such as local production and ways of increasing local production, such as human capital and social protection. They all matter as much as the wage figure is safe. So there is no single magic bullet to the discussion. Then, by way of also introduction here, I said, how do we look at wages for? Thank you very much. Yes. So we look at the issue that a worker may earn a higher salary. Let's say their paycheck shows an increment of 20%, yet be economically worse off if prices rise by, let's say, 30%. They are earning more naira, but these naira buy little or less in terms of these products and services that we have rendered to Nigerian worker. And I feel this is something that we have to look at critically to see the extent to which we can ameliorate this persistent. Sorry, please. It's raining cats and dogs here, and I am having some technical issues. I hope we'll clear them. Am I back?
Yeah, you're back, ma. You're welcome, ma. You have the floor again.
Thank you very much. Yes. So we said, then
Thank
we
you,
are
ma.
moving to slide 5, the minimum wage history. Yes. So looking at the Nigerian wage journey over the past 24 years, I said we are taking 24 years for the study because it's a year that 24 years we have a child born and then he is made an adult by 24. He can vote and be voted for by 24 years. And he can pass through his nursery, primary to the university level. So we have had 5 minimum wage revisions since 2000, for instance. In 2000, we said the minimum wage was 5,500, rising to in 2004 to 7,500. By 2011, it jumped to 18,000. In 2019, it reached 30,000. And in 2024, we have seen an increment to 70,000. Each of these revisions was intended to restore lost ground, to help workers catch up, especially with rising costs. This 2024 period, however, when minimum wage was raised to 70,000, it represents 133% jump. It is the largest single percentage increment since 2000, for instance. On the surface, this looks very good and promising for workers. However, the critical issue to look at is that this increment coincided with inflation peaking above 30%, around 31. In fact, at the time the new wage was introduced, inflation was already eroding the value. So this is one of the paradoxes that we have to look at and have to find solutions to. The next conceptual framework that we will want to address is the issue of the minimum wage. Here we said this is the legally marketed, mandated, lowest remuneration employers may pay workers for their own labor. According to International Labour Organization, ILO, they outlined, for instance, key objectives for this minimum wage. One, they said, is there to protect workers against unduly low pay. It is there to also reduce poverty among employed persons. Minimum wage is there to promote social justice and inclusion. It is there to reduce income inequality. These are noble goals, and they remain so, as well as relevant today as they were when they were first fashioned out. The next, under the same slide, in terms of inflation, we said inflation is a sustained increase in the general price level of goods and services over time. I want to look at inflation as a hidden tax, especially tax on earnings. It does not appear on any tax receipt, yet it takes money out of the workers' pockets just as surely as any government levy. When inflation occurs, for instance, food becomes more expensive, transportation costs rise, housing and healthcare costs also increase, educational expenses also expand. And when all these essentials become more expensive, a wage increase that does not keep pace to this particular inflation is effectively a pay cut. The third, especially slide 7, under the conceptual framework, we want to look at also affordability. This is household ability to purchase necessary goods and services using available income. It depends on two factors, the income level and the prices of goods and services. Income levels look at what you earn. Prices of goods and services look at what things cost and how you can afford them. So if your income doubles, but prices triple, your affordability actually decreased. You can afford less despite earning more. Purchasing power, on the other hand, is the quantity of goods and services a given amount of money can actually buy. Here, we can look at it from some illustrative perspective. 100,000 monthly in a low inflation environment may be worth substantially more than 150,000 monthly given to a worker in a high inflation environment. So the wage inflation nexus is that these concepts have great meaning to the audience and to Nigerian worker. There is the need for us to look at it holistically so that we'll be able to provide justification for increment in wages while making reference to other cooperant factors in the production process, 1, in the economy, 2, and inflation targeting, 3. So we need to look at all this into account before we pursue wage increment. It's not just about wage increase all the time. There is a backup to the wage increase. Then we have the Nigerian data. And one of the data we said we will look at is under the 9th slide, is to show Nigerians' inflation trajectory over the past several years. When we look at it from 2019, average inflation we said is about 11%. This has risen in 2020 to slightly around 13%. In 2021, it climbed to 17% also. In 2022, it reached 18%. And in 2023, it surged to 24.5%, while in 2024, it peaked around 31%. This is the highest level in decades, and following the rebasement of the CPI, it shows moderating, for instance, somewhat later on. Then we also look at the Nigerian data within the regional context. To fully understand Nigeria's inflation challenges, we need to place it in regional context. This slide shows average annual inflation for the 10-year period ending in 2024 for across such African economies and Nigeria. While using the 10-year average, which smooths out, for instance, recent spikes, Nigerian inflation we have seen is running well above the regional average. And this is the crucial point. Nigerians' wage policies are set in a high inflation context. When you have persistently high inflation than your peers in the West African region or in the Sub-African region, the value of every wage increase is systematically eroded. A Nigerian worker, for instance, earning the minimum wage, and a Kenyan worker earning equivalent in their own country or in their own country with their own currency, maybe starting from different bases. But if Nigerian inflation consistently rise by 5 to 10% percentage points higher than the worker, we have seen the Nigerian worker may be falling behind. This is not just about Nigerian internal dynamics. It's also about our regional competition. High inflation makes our export less competitive, our savings less valuable, and our workers poorer relative to their peers. So there's a need for us to look at this also when it comes to looking at or for higher wage increment. Have to look at it vis-a-vis other factors, for instance, in our equation. So Nigerian inflation challenge, we said there are 4 noticeable challenges that we have pointed out in these slides, and these are all structural drivers. Number one, we said there is first exchange rate depreciation. A weaker naira raises the cost of imported food, machinery, production inputs, and transport. Nigeria imports a significant portion of what we consume, from wheat to machinery to pharmaceuticals. When the naira falls against the dollar, for instance, every imported good becomes more expensive. The second thing is to look at the supply side constraints. Agricultural insecurity, weak infrastructure, and logistic gaps increase production cost economy-wise. Farmers can't get to their goods, especially to the market. Manufacturers face power outages and poor roads of transportation. Every inefficiency adds to the final price consumers pay. So it's generally passed down to the consumer. The third is the energy cost. Higher fuel prices raise the cost of transportation, manufacturing, food distribution, and other services. Nigeria, despite being a major oil producer, faces high and volatile energy prices. When fuel costs rise, which we all witness today, the price of everything also rises, because everything must be transported from point of production to point of sale or consumption. Fourth is import dependence. Nigeria heavily relies, we said, on imported food, pharmaceuticals, machinery, and consumer goods, which exposes our prices to external shocks. When global prices rise or the exchange rate weakens, then prices in Nigeria rise almost immediately and substantially. These drivers are interconnected. Exchange rate depreciation makes imports more expensive, which drives inflation, which weakens the exchange rate further. So it's a vicious cycle that remains coordinated as a policy action to break. Coming to the next slide, where we also examine this data, we look at, for instance, the depreciation also of naira against the dollar, which is the exchange rate depreciation. When we look at it, hello, yes.
We are now
Okay.
Thank
hearing
you
Prof.
for
Okay.
thank you for welcoming back. I will try to
Well,
resist. I will resist
I don't hear you
any
again.
fluctuation with this particular, especially when it comes to this presentation. So we are looking at it from the exchange rate
Okay.
perspective. And we said by 2021, it had weakened to about 381. In 2023, it was around 461 before the exchange rate unification policy that was put in place. By June 2023, following this unification window, it jumped sharply to about 770. In 2024, however, it reached approximately 1,478 naira to a dollar, while there was some slight decline. In 2026, it moderated slightly to 1,360 to 380, and that's the level it was going over time. So the exchange rate window was a significant policy reform, and we said it caused the sharpest single jump in the exchange rate, pushing import costs and prices, for instance, just a few years ago. And because so many goods and services, that is directly or indirectly, are transacted, for instance, using naira, we see some higher prices also following suit. The exchange rate and inflation are deeply connected. A weak naira means imported inflation. Imported inflation means higher domestic prices. Higher domestic prices mean lower real wages. A worker's wage is normally paid in It's an uncomfortable reality at a highly import-dependent economy like Nigeria. Then the other data we want to look at is in terms of household spending. To understand affordability, we need to understand where Nigerian households spend their money. And this is very obvious. According to National Bureau of Statistics Consumption Expenditure Pattern Survey, here is how a typical Nigerian household, they said, spend their income. Number one, food consumes about 57%, by far the largest share in terms of the scale of preference. Transportation cost gulp about 6%, health about 6%, education 6%, and other non-food items to about 25%. The most striking feature is that 57% spent on food for low-income households. This figure is even higher, reaching as high as 70 to 80% in some climes, in some states, in some regions. Here, what does that mean for our discussion under wages and inflation? It means that when food prices rise, Nigerian workers feel it immediately and intensely. Food is not just a discretionary expense, it is a necessity. You must and you cannot cut back on food the way somebody can cut back on, for instance, other luxuries and other entertainments and so on and so forth. This is why food inflation is particularly devastating for low-income workers. When prices of grain, for instance, of gari, of rice, of beans, and cooking oil rises, the impact on household budget is immediate and is very severe. So let's move to slide 14, the limits of wage policy. We are not saying that wage policy is the answer, and we are not saying that we can discard wage policy. We have to be clear here. Saying we should abandon wage policy is not the case. Minimum wage increases are necessary and important, but we must understand their limits. When wages rise without matching productivity or output, 4 outcomes tend to follow. 1, inflationary pressure. Employees pass higher labor cost to consumers, triggering cost push inflation. This is the classic wage price spiral. Workers get a rise, but that rise drives up the cost of goods and services, eroding the value of the rise itself. Then secondly, there is also the reduced employment. Small and medium enterprises, SMEs, which are the engine of Nigerian economy, may respond with hiring freezes, workforce cuts, or a shift to informal employment. They simply can't afford the higher wages, especially without productivity improvement. The result, workers who are priced out of the formal employment. Then thirdly, there is the fiscal, which can fuel inflation, creating a vicious cycle. Fourthly, it gives only temporary relief. Even when wage increases are implemented, started. Now, to emphasize what I've been saying, what we look at is that workers deserve fair compensation for their labor. But I'm also saying that wage policy alone is insufficient. It's like putting a band on a wound that requires surgery. We need to complement wage increases with measures that address the underlying drivers of inflation and low productivity. Without these measures, we are caught in an endless cycle of chasing our own tail. So we also want to look at the deepening informality. Only a fraction of the workers that are mostly public sector inclined and normal and formal private sector employees benefit from wage laws, if at all. The rest absorb inflation with no flow. They are on their own, bearing the full brunt of rising prices without any, for instance, protection. Second, recurring labor unrest, for instance, each cycle of wage erosion triggers fresh union demands as well as strike threats, disrupting productivity and investment confidence. Nigeria has been increased repeatedly through industrial actions over wage issues. Each round of strike costs the economy, discourages investment, and further strained employer-employee relations. There is also the widening inequality, particularly the fixed income earners and informal workers that fall further behind as prices rise faster than any wage adjustment can complement or compensate for. The gap between those with wage protection and those without grows wider. Those who can't bargain effectively, especially the poor, the informal participants, informal sector workers, and the vulnerables are left behind. We have to find a way of bringing them into the fold. Fourth, it also erodes policy credibility. Wage reviews that are quickly wiped out by inflation weakens public trust, especially in government's ability to protect living standards. When workers see their hard-won wage increases eroded by other monstrous factors like inflation, they lose faith in the system. This undermines social cohesion and creates a cycle of cynicism and disentanglement. So we have to find a working balance in order to ameliorate the hidden fears, the crisis it will bring up, and ways of fixing the crisis. So there is the sustainable solution, which is under slide 16. So if wages we said are above and they are not enough, then what is? What is the solution? The answer, we said, lies with understanding productivity, which is a true engine of wage growth. Countries that sustain rising living standards peer wage growth with rising output per worker. Let us look at the benchmark economies. We will address countries like Germany, for instance, South Korea, Singapore, and the Nordic countries. In each of these countries, workers can earn wages because they produce high-value product. Their productivity underpins their prosperity. This creates, like I said, a vicious cycle, and that is what I will refer to as productivity loop. Higher output per worker will lead to better technology, skills, and infrastructure, which further leads to sustainable wage growth because workers can afford to pay more. Employers can afford to pay more, pay the workers more. And this also turn means improved living standard. Workers can buy more goods and services in the process. It's a win-win solution for all concerned. So we will look at what Nigeria needs to make this happen. In Nigeria, we need industrial modernization, moving beyond extractive, for instance, industries to value-added manufacturing. We also need to invest in digital infrastructure and transformation, using technology to boost productivity across all sectors. We also need to understand agricultural mechanization, that is moving from subsistence to commercial agriculture. There is the need also to invest in skill development, investing in our workers' capabilities and capacities. There is also the need for better infrastructure that governments and other PPP arrangements can provide in terms of roads, power, and connectivity that enables economic activity to flourish. These are not easy changes. They require sustained investment as well as political will, but they are the foundation of a lasting prosperity. So when we look beyond wages, we must try to look at what happens, not just a wage issue, but beyond wages, to fully cast our minds into other things, such as affordability, which depends on what things cost, not just what workers earn. Here are also key cost areas that affect household budgets. We said number one is food, which is disproportionately affects low-income households. Food is the largest share of their spending. So food inflation hits them hardest when prices of maize or rice or cooking oil rises. The poor feel it immediately. There are no shock absorbers there. Then there is also the issue of housing, which we explained earlier. Rising rents place significant strain on household budgets. Many are affected and they shrink. There is also the transportation cost. Higher cost of transportation hit workers directly through either commuting cost or indirectly through pricier goods that they have to buy using a transport business to bring the goods to their doorsteps. So transport costs affect the price of everything from food to factory and so on, factory inputs. There is also the healthcare issue. Rising costs reduce disposable income left for other necessities. A single illness, God forbid, can push a family into poverty. Without health insurance and other affordable means, workers are on the mercy of medical emergency away from their financial ruin. Then there is also the issue of education. While we say growing educational expenses add further pressure on family finances, school fees, payments, uniforms, acquisition, and supplies to and from school compete with food and housing for limited family resources. A worker, therefore, earning 70,000 per month still struggles. He struggles for food, for housing, for transport, for healthcare, and for education, and all becoming more expensive. The wage increase therefore helps, but it does not solve the problem. That's what this paper is trying to explain. What of the lessons that we learn from abroad? Nigeria does not need to reinvent the wheel. We can learn from other countries that have successfully managed the wage inflation dynamic. In the United Kingdom, for instance, they use independent wage commissions that weigh inflation expectations. They also look at productivity trends, employment conditions, and business sustainability. These commissions depoliticize wage decisions and ensure they are grounded in economic reality rather than a political expediency. Germany, for instance, demonstrates the power of social dialogue and productivity-linked wage growth. German unions and employers negotiate wage that reflect productivity gains, reinforcing industrial competitiveness. That's why their products is competitive, because Germany maintains a sharp manufacturing base and a high wage simultaneously. We look at Singapore, for instance, that takes a holistic strategy, blending human capital development, skills upgrading, productivity gains, and wage support. The government invests heavily on worker training and retraining, ensuring that wage increases are backed by genuine productivity improvements. Whereas Nordic countries show how labor market cooperates through what collective bargaining, high productivity, and strong
Mr.
social
Moderator,
cohesion. Yes.
time.
Okay, I will try to get to where I will put a pause and maybe quickly run down the remaining issues. So the path forward, thus under slide 19, what do we do in order to move forward? We bring out 6 policy roadmap. 1, we say we should try to control inflation through what? Monetary policy, exchange rate management, and fiscal discipline. 2, we should improve productivity through infrastructure, technology, energy, and skill investment. We should support local production through agricultural mechanization, manufacturing, industries, and SME development. We should have periodic wage reviews. Wage review is not, we are not saying we should not have wage review. We should do that periodically. They should try to be predictable adjustment linked to economic conditions. We should also invest in human capital, which is key, and that is an investment in education, in healthcare, and vocational training. We should strengthen social protection, which includes what? Includes health insurance schemes, affordable houses, and food security. Then moving quickly to recommendations, we said we want to recommend a number of things that should be taken into account. And this includes, for instance, periodic wage reviews that we have explained. It also includes investment in human capital. It includes improved productivity among various workforce. It includes supporting local production and strengthen social protection, and so on and so forth. While for implementation strategy, we said there is the need for us to look at short term, which is 0 to 12 months period. We look at medium term, 1 to 3 years. In the short term, we look at ways of stabilizing exchange rate policy to reduce imported inflation. We should launch a periodic wage review mechanism to prevent disruptive adjustment and implement emergency food price intervention to protect the most vulnerable. In the medium term of 1 to 3 years, we should scale up agricultural mechanization. We should expand social protection program and strengthen SMEs across the length and breadth of the country by creating jobs and improving productivity. Long term is that it's going to be 3 to 7 years, and this requires industrial as well as digital transformation to shift the economy. So, conclusion, final. Our presentation has made one central argument. The problem in Nigeria is not simply that of wages are low. The deeper challenge is that inflation continuously and endlessly erodes earnings. We also said sustainable improvements in workers' welfare require both higher wages and lower inflation to be achieved through productivity growth, price stability, and sustainable economic development. So, among other things, these are what I have also. And final, I said we need to have the political will, coordinated action, and sustained commitment. But the alternative, continuing the cycle of wage erosion, is unacceptable to Nigerian workers and for our own national development. Thank you for your attention. Close the chapter.
Thank you very much. Let me apologize to our participants for making the seminar to extend this far. It's deliberate because of the issues being discussed. This is very topical national issue, and it is important we allow the presenters to be able to speak deeply into their well-prepared slide, cutting them in the middle way. Will not serve us appropriately because we miss the key point, and I believe the sacrifice we made by extending it worth the while, given the quality of presentation that were made. So we have the floor, but I think from what was presented, we can see that there is a kind of uniform in their argument. And the core argument from this last presentation is that the problem with minimum wage is not the wage itself, but rather that there are issues with inflation, which is the silent killer. We also have the fact that the problem also is with productivity, that if you can fix productivity issues, then the real wage is more important than nominal wage. And therefore, the problem is not about should the wage rate increase, should minimum wage increase, but the problem is will worker benefit when minimum wage is increased, given the fact that inflation move faster than wage rate, and which creates the problem we normally call in economics the income illusion and money illusion. That it is clear now from experience from the last 5 wage increase that the announcement effect take immediate effect on prices using a minimum wage. The price in the market respond immediately when. And for instance, the exchange rate was raised, the fuel price subsidy was removed, and all prices jumped up. It is recently 2-3 years after that the wage rate is now being raised. So it's difficult for the wage rate to catch up with the increase in price. So at the end of the day, the increased wage rate is not addressing the purpose for which it was implemented. The purpose was to improve the welfare of workers, but because of the inflation pressure, the value of the new wage rate has been eroded before it was announced. And therefore, the speaker is asking that we should look beyond ordinary wage increase, that we should consider other factors, and more especially the issue of productivity, and also the way they can do it such a way that at least even if the inflation will be at the problem, the wage rate will also be enough to counter that. And if that is not done, then we can look at productivity as the key driver
that if it is possible, supply of goods and services increased will be enough to buy more goods, and therefore nominal wage, the real wage will have increased, so that the problem can also be addressed from supply side rather from demand side, in terms of maybe empowering people to buy more by giving them more money without considering the supply constraint, that unless we remove the supply constraint that is literally causing the inflation to rise, any attempt to increase wage rate may not translate to better well-being for workers. And therefore, there should be a deliberate effort. And he created a 6-point policy roadmap that he believes if you follow it, will definitely work. For instance, control inflation, improve productivity, supply local productions, then again, penalty wage reviews and investment capital and strengthen social protection. And if we do this, we are likely to have a better minimum wage that can be reflective of the economy. So it gave a systematic phase implementation timeline that can be followed, and also identify some strategic key stakeholders and the role they will play: the federal government, the central bank, the labor union, the employers and employees, development partners, and the civil societies are also have to play critical role. And he concluded that the problem in Nigeria is not simply that length, is that inflation continuously eroding the earnings, and therefore sustainable improvement in workers' welfare requires is difficult to achieve as simultaneously, because you cannot at least have a lower wage and have higher productivity, because inflation is definitely is the rate of increase in price, and price serve as a signal of investment opportunity. So whenever there is increase in price, that will drive productivities. And so if you want to keep wage rate low, therefore you keep labor low. And if you want to keep inflation also low, then you keep investment settlement low. So but it's then suggested that we need to strike a balance, look for a balance between the two, that we must look for a working balance between wage increase and inflation increase. And more importantly, is suggesting that we focus more on real income and not nominal income. I want to thank you once again for these presentations. Despite the network challenges, the on and off, you still ensure that you deliver this efficiently and effectively. Now we are open the floor for question and answer. We'll be able to take it very few. So those of us who may have questions, you may drop it on the chat box when we read it out, and we'll call on the speakers to respond to them individually. So the floor is open now, and then let us take your questions. And if you want to speak, please just raise up your hand. You'll be identified and then called to speak. Who is taking the lead?
Okay, if you allow me, can I go on?
Yes, Professor Oladeji, please, you have the floor.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, the moderator. I don't know. Let me be frank that the presentation today has been very, very deep and inciting. Right from the lead paper to all the three speakers, they have been so deep, and they have actually analyzed this issue with passion. And I think, in fact, at a point in time, I said, they raise question, they answer it, and they say, is there anything that we will be able to talk about this issue again? Because the analysis was deep. I agree with them in virtually all the issues raised, especially the key drivers of evidence-based wage structure that initially was identified by the lead speaker, which is inflation, that is issue of erosion of the real value of the naira, the productivity issue, how do you measure, how do you grow the GDP in terms of even though when it grows, is it inclusive? And the last one, which is the fiscal capacity, the ability to pay, is a main challenge And I think virtually all the speakers, including the moderators, refer to this. So there's no need to really belabor the issue that are so presented in a very clear and unambiguous language. My only interjection, just a point, is about an issue which one or two presenters, including the lead presenter, talked about, or even though tangentially done a recommendation. It is the issue about the pathologies of the Nigerian federal system. And the question, there are so many pathologies. The Nigerian system has a lot of issues people are really talking about. And one of which is the setting wages for tiers of government. And it also ties to the fiscal capacity that is repeatedly mentioned. And I don't know whether to call it abnormal, whether to call it uncalled for, and to say it has the tendency of eroding the subnational powers, the fiscal power of the subnational system. So essentially, if care is not taken, it will remain unsustainable. And I think recommendation was made about it. The critical principle of fiscal federalism is that tiers of government set, because the nature of the economy is not the same. The generation of revenue, the challenges here and there, it can't be the same even for all the states. Now, setting up a wage, and we call it national wage structure, for which there must be compliance from all the states, looks strange in federal political system. And I think the discussion around it was that if you want to really practice federalism, we should allow the states, the components of the federal entity. For us, it is the state and local. For some, it's only the states or provincial government, when you are dealing with a classical federal system, to set their own wage based on their ability to pay. Because we are relieved now that I'm not sure any state in Nigeria is really owing. And how will they owe? Because the reform that took place at the onset of this administration has liberalized the inter-IGR system, such that even before you talk of what they earn, the accruals from the federation account is huge. Most of the states now earn more than 5 times what they used to earn. And because of that, they have leverage. They have a lot of money to play around with. So we should allow them to set the wage which they can pay, subject to negotiation by their own union at that level. Maybe what the law can say is to say, let there be a regulation, that because we are all talking, we are all Nigerians. If you work, and that is what happens everywhere. What the minimum wage, the salary earned in Washington is different from what they earn in New York. The states pay what they can afford. But now, you know the argument where this thing started, when we are saying, how can you force us? The governors forum said, no, you cannot do that. And that was why we didn't really follow the principle of fiscal federalism. And I think I'm concluding now, one of the recommendations that we emanate from this very important webinar is that we should embed a structure that allows us to really practice fiscal federalism. I don't want to use true federalism because there's nothing like that. A federal system is true to the environment where it operates. But I think essentially speaking, that one recommendation should be part of what we are pushing forward. And generally speaking, I say thank you to everybody. The discussion has been so. I follow even when the network of Professor Jalingo was unwavering. I wasn't enjoying, but I stick to, because the presentation were very deep. I want to say thank you to the moderator for allowing me to have this short remark. And I believe that essentially Nigeria will be better for it if recommendations are implemented. Thank you very much. I'm done, sir. Prof.
Thank you for, sorry, I didn't know that I was muted. So thank you very much for your short observations and then contributions. So I totally agree with you. Currently now, the minimum wage now that we have allows state, even local government, to determine their own minimum wage. But what federal government did was that the level it cannot fall below, and which is standard across the world. So at least there's a national minimum wage in every country. So be above that, it's expected that others can set their own. So, but from the perspectives we are having now, that even that the minimum wage we talk about, again, we are saying that maybe we should not even set the minimum and allow each state, each local government, even the private sector to determine their minimum wage if we are truly want to allow markets to drive our economy. And if we ever set extremely too minimum wage, then workers will vote by their feet by moving to other organizations. But when federal government say compellingly that people should pay, it should not pay below a certain wage, and yet they cannot employ everybody that's likely to lose job elsewhere, then that will not work. And that's exactly what happened now. Given Nigeria that's having almost around 80% of our workers employed in informal small subsistence company who is still struggling to meet up with energy costs, and yet the federal government says it must pay higher personnel costs. I think one have to go for the other. Either they will pay and retrench, or the worker will stay and collect lower wage, which actually the case in Nigeria. So, like, what I'm taking from here is that maybe government may also not over legislate what definitely is not directly under their control. So, thank you very much for that contribution. So, is there? I'm looking for if there's any other contribution. Yes.
Sorry. So I want to just make some contribution on what Professor Alex said.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, please.
Part of my recommendation is what he was saying. When I didn't say that they should legislate a fixed minimum wage for all the tiers of government, I actually emphasized in my conclusion that no, each state should be allowed to set their minimum wage, and also private sector to set their minimum wage based on their profits, private sector, and also based on IGR and also allocation from the Fed for states. So that's my recommendation too.
Yeah, I said it. I commended you for saying that, Prof.
So we're giving this, we want to thank everybody for contributions made, and we also want to thank the organizer for giving us opportunity for this. And we believe that at the end of the day, these discussions will translate to a communique as well as a policy brief that will be shared across all the relevant stakeholders and authority. And also, we also form part of our discussions for that. So I also want to appreciate our three for web peer slide and delivery, and also all our audience participants. We want to thank you. Stay long despite the long period, and we believe this shows how you are committed to national issues and how you also trust the organization that at least is championing this cause. So I want to hand over to Ariola, so please provide the concluding closing remark, and then we can close the session.
Okay, thank you very much.
Please allow me to say something.
Go ahead, General.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir, we can hear.
What I can gather from all these discussions are some very key areas. Number one, we copy like crazy what other economies are doing, especially in United States, very much in other states, and to a certain extent, maybe Europe, but very much in other states. Whereas the ecosystem and the culture are totally different. Two, we create or we copy institutions from those Western countries with the same mandate. But like Professor Jalingo pointed out, we don't allow them to be able to fill their mandate because of the political interference with whatever independence they have in being able to advise the government. Number three, NISER is supposed to be a government think tank for social and economic research.
It's not supposed that we are.
And from what Professor Okuwa said, and who is a very, very senior staff of NISER, one of the key problems in resolving this minimum wage, the pricing, inflation, affordability, purchasing power is evidence-based. That's what happens in every other country. It's evidence-based. Even though Trump served the labor economics person. We have wages commission in Nigeria. In fact, they have just put a retired senior officer there from the Air Force instead of an economist, which is one of those problems you have. Fortunately, Professor Jalingo and his colleagues in Kano have accepted to organize a conference on institutional economics. And those of you, you're all experts in economics, you know how key that is, especially for African countries. Number two, we cannot limit what we have discussed here today to issue communique and policy brief, which nobody's going to read or nobody's going to take serious. Can we, those of you with your institutions, organize a conference on this particular subject? Even if we cannot bring people together, but I believe we can, have virtual experiences with young people. I was in Ibadan last week for a conference on religion and economy. And there were 100 presenters there, 20 by hybrid. They paid 25,000 naira each. The VC himself was shocked. And it was Leeds University. And why Leeds? Because Nigerian public universities, they have their own way of doing conferences. It was after 5 years, the Leeds that accepted to do this conference with an abstract. So can your institution, the three of you or four of you, agree and leave the Professor Jalingo out because he's already accepted for institutional economy? Can we organize a conference on this? Third point is that we have been talking about informal economics in Africa. I can't remember from the time of Mazi's specialist economics at the University of Ibadan. When I was a young man, I'm 83 years of age now. Marxism has died now in terms of economics, but I'm sure you still teach it in your classroom. Today, the new Prime Minister of Britain is going around. What is he talking about? Purchasing power and affordability all over UK. Strong affordability. Why can't you organize a conference? And like Professor Jalingo said again, comparatively with other African countries, not European, not America. Comparatively, you can do that. But my problem with public universities in Nigeria or NISER is that you speak to people who can organize these conferences, they tell you they have no money. Third Fund has billions of naira. What is Third Fund doing with that money? They give to universities. So how can a university in Nigeria tell me they don't have money to organize conferences that impact on people's lives? Number two request that I want to make is this. ECOWAS countries have made up their mind now. They are going to do ECO. What impact will ECO have on the people of this country? Again, Professor Jalingo mentioned the issue of currencies. What impact will ECO have on the people of this country in terms of purchasing power and affordability? And much more cross-border trade and so on. And like somebody said, every country survives on trade. Very key. Every country survives on trade. And is there anybody doing that? Looking at that part of ECO coming into, Can we do something about that in terms of ECHO? And Professor Ibekilo was very particular about informality. And we know this is something that is mentioned. Why is it that nobody has done something about that? And I'm sure there are some economists who have worked on that area, but there's no change in Africa. It is the same story. And we have high rate of informality. What economic system are we copying? And last point I want to make is this: is that Mr. Lumelu, who had plenty of money, decided that African economic system needs a change, a transformation. And some of you might have been part of his project, which he called Afro-capitalism, which I told some professors that was a mistake from the word go. Capitalism is a deadly economic system. And even the Americans are trying to change and struggling against capitalism. Unlike Europe or the Scandinavian countries, which was mentioned in one of the presentations. What is the system that works for Africa? Asians. When people talk about demography in Africa, India has 1.something billion, they're increasing. China, looking for more children. How do they feed over 1 billion people? Is there something wrong with the African brain? So, in summary, we need a conference on affordability, purchasing power, inflation, pricing, and everything. We need a conference. Who is going to volunteer? Can your 3 institutions, those of you who are here, agree to organize a conference on that? 2, how will ECHO affect not only Nigeria, African countries? Because they said in July next year, they are going to introduce ECHO. Guinea has pulled out for one reason or the other, but the other countries have accepted. Fusing the CFA and other currencies of Africa. Ghana has accepted a long time ago. Nigeria has been the stumbling block to ECHO. Now, can Nigeria take the lead in organizing the conference? Those are the 2 challenges I want to throw to you, professors. I am a common man. I am in the twilight of my years, but the young people are looking up to you. I saw that in 2015, when there were about 80 people for a conference on what? On African ancestral faith. And I saw that in Ibadan last week. The young people are looking up to you. And our professors don't go for conferences, except they tell them to come and be keynote speakers. When they finish, they go. The young ones don't even have a chance to talk to them or to be mentored in the conference. These are your challenges. This is your future. Thank you very much for accepting the invitation. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Thanks, Professor Okuwa, Professor Ibekilo, and Professor Jalingo. So I've thrown these 2 challenges to you. Let us know what you want to do.
Thank you, General. Professor Okuwa, do you want to say something, ma?
Yes.
Please go ahead, ma. You have the floor.
Thank you very much for the question and the challenge that you threw at us. Actually, when he was saying that NISER is supposed to be policy think tank for the federal government, and I said it's not supposed, it is policy think tank. And empirically, there is no time that the minimum wage issue in Nigeria is being done that NISER is not involved. Even the one that was done last, I was part of the people that put a position paper together for the government to represent NISER and propose. But what we are trying to say here, I agree with General that there is need for us to organize a conference. Actually, we'll try to look into that. We'll work with my colleagues, the other professors online, the moderator, and Professor Bruno, if I'm correct. Even though you said we should not talk to Professor Jalingo, we'll still talk to her. So we'll look, I'm talking about the conference on the minimum wage. we'll try to look into that. NISER will try to look into that from our end on how to organize a conference on that. The issue of funding that you talked about, it's unfortunate that the text fund is not reaching out to research institutes. Don't know why. We've tried to put up a position paper towards that. The R&D is very key, but they're not giving research institution money. They are giving it to university. So if you want to do anything with text fund, we have to go to university. So maybe the university, through the other professors from the university, they can get funding from there to do the conference. But that notwithstanding, we'll still plan to do the online one, which will not cost us too much. And to try to speak to younger ones so that they'll be able to know, especially the issue of the strategy, the framework that we work using both the Professor Jalingo's recommendations and the 3 recommendations. We harmonize it together and we see the one that we can look into that will work. So that's my comments. So thank you very much. Thank you, Prof. I'm done.
Thank you very much, Prof. Thank you very much. So in conclusion, I would just like to say a very big thank you to all the presenters and the moderators. A very big thank you for
Hello, we are not hearing you again.
We're not hearing you. Our network has gone again.
Your network don't jump out. Anyway, I think she's trying to round it off.
Yes.
Professor Okuwa, I appreciate your submission around this extending this engagement and discussion further. It's unfortunate that the TED Fund is not looking at the research institutes. I seriously believe that is the hub of research. In the university, we do community service and teaching plus research, but where research is domiciled mainly is this research institute, and we can't take it away from you guys. That's another case we raise for another day. But as it concerns this minimum wage, as raised by the third speaker, we must find means to institute an automatic system where workers do not need to start using political influence, other non-economic based criteria to get politicians and political office holders to comply to wage increases, but to look at what obtains in reality. It is the function and duty of the employer of labor to create an enabling environment for labor to be most productive. An average individual is a follower on default. That is why you get to some junctions, you see a madman controlling traffic and people are complying. So we need to get people who are in office that really want to get things done and see that things are done, and then they'll be compensated adequately. And because once you see inflation spiraling up, there's a problem, there's a malfunction in the administrative sector of the economy, and they have to compensate labor to the extent which the system has.
Thank you, Prof. Maybe the moderator will close us. I think.
Thank you very much, sir.
You are back.
So I think yes, the network. I'm sorry. So I just wanted to add that I'm happy with the issue of the minimum wage, but for me also, I'm an economist, but I just believe that it goes beyond the minimum wage. There are some other underlying factors we need to also pay attention to, like the issue of inflation, pricing control. So if government decides to increase salaries. Like they've done, prices goes up, every other thing is affected. So if those pricing boards, like the food pricing boards and the other pricing agencies are not used to control pricing, the effect of the minimum wage increment will never be felt by the average Nigerian citizen. So I just want to say thank you very much for all your presentations and all the contributions. We appreciate it. And we look forward to the conference that General has actually pushed us to organize in view of the minimum wage. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you, participants. Thank you, everybody that joined. We appreciate you, all my friends and my colleagues. Thank you very much.
Now, in follow-up to the challenge, I think the organization can still coordinate. They can reach out to each university or create another meeting where we can discuss the modality for the conference.
Okay, sir.
It's
Can that
doable,
still
it's
happen this
possible.
year or it will be next year?
It's something like a coordinating unit. I believe
Cannot be this year.
2027.
for
Okay.
if you want to have a conference, should be early next year. This year is
Okay,
gone.
sir. No problem, sir.
So
Noted.
let's make it early next year. So thank you.
No problem, sir.
But I will reach out
Thank
to
you very
you
much,
how
sir.
you like can be involved.
We'll appreciate that, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone. So on that note, I'll stop the recording.
Thank you very much, everybody.